Welcome everybody. This is part 2 of my free series called This is Consciousness. In this video, we're going to be looking at paradigms of consciousness. Paradigms of consciousness are how we organize and understand ourselves and the world, and they could also be called worldviews. So we're going to be starting to understand what these interpretive lenses or worldviews are. And then we're going to look at the major paradigms that individuals and collectives, humanity as a whole, moves through and how they relate together. As always, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to type them into the chat and I will pick them up as we go. I also want to welcome all the folks who are following along on the Facebook group. Hey there. Okay, so to get us started, here's a quote from historian and philosopher Richard Tarnas. Our worldview is not simply the way we look at the world. It reaches inward to constitute our innermost being, and outward to constitute the world. It mirrors but also reinforces and even forges the structures, armorings, and possibilities of our interior life. It deeply configures our psychic and somatic experiences, the patterns of our sensing, knowing, and interacting with the world. No less potently, our worldview, our beliefs and theories, our maps, our metaphors, our myths, our interpretive assumptions, constellates our outer reality, shaping and working the world's malleable potentials in 1,000 ways of subtly reciprocal interaction. Worldviews create worlds. So, worldview or paradigm, this is our topic today, and why we care is because how we look at the world shapes our experience of the world itself profoundly. So my definition, a paradigm of consciousness is an organizing story about the nature of self and world. Paradigms are held subjectively by individuals, so each one of us uses a paradigm. And paradigms are also held intersubjectively by cultures. So a group of people, a society, also has an organizing story about who they are and what the world is. Our paradigm is our interpretive lens. It is the thing that we look through to see ourselves and the world. So it's our lens. And it's composed of our values, assumptions, beliefs, myths, and identities. Paradigms are internally coherent. So from within one paradigm, most of what's happening in the world makes sense. They are discrete, meaning they form a bucket, and I'm either in this paradigm or I'm in that paradigm, but I usually don't straddle between the two. And they're sticky. So that last point of not straddling between the two, they tend to grab us and hold us in one until we're ready to move to another. So that's my words for it. A lot of what I'm going to be covering today comes from a school of thought called integral philosophy. So just to give some other language to the same concept, here's Steve McIntosh, an integral author. He says, according to integral philosophy, each stage of consciousness is a natural epistemology. And I'm just going to put you on mute, Dennis, if I can. Sorry. And welcome. All good. Good to see you. Thank you. So according to integral philosophy, each stage of consciousness, meaning each paradigm, is a natural epistemology. It's an organic way of making meaning with its own distinct view of the world that arises from a specific set of problematic life conditions and their corresponding solutions. These stages, or paradigms, function as living dynamic systems that organize both entire human societies as well as the minds of the individuals who participate in those societies. So I want to make a distinction between what I spoke about last week, which was states of consciousness, and then this new topic I'm introducing, paradigms of consciousness. So our states of consciousness are a priori givens, they're elements of the cosmos. And if you recall, our state is our moment-to-moment experience of what's happening. So states have always been part of this universe, and humans are able to tap into them and explore them. Paradigms, on the other hand, develop and have developed together with humans. Paradigms were not here from the very beginning. It's as we are creating our culture and as we are maturing and evolving in ourselves, our paradigms come into being with us. And we'll look at those. It'll make more sense when we get to the specifics. So the state of consciousness is the content of my experience. It's what I'm looking at. And the paradigm is how I look at it. It's the lens through which I'm looking to see the contents of my experience. These two elements of consciousness. Human consciousness evolves through paradigms. So paradigms, as I said, they're discrete and sticky. They're these buckets. They're worldviews that are internally coherent. And we grow from one bucket to the next bucket to the next bucket, one lens to the next lens to the next lens. There are more basic paradigms, and then on top of them are more advanced paradigms. So they structure themselves in what's called a growth hierarchy. And what that means is that each paradigm, each worldview has to be grown through to get to the next higher level. Higher levels transcend but also include the lower levels. So the metaphor here is you can imagine that there's a ladder with different rungs on it. The lower rungs are necessary steps to get to the higher rungs. They have to be moved through, and this movement needs to be sequential. The higher level rungs, the higher order paradigms, use the lower rungs as their foundation. They don't get rid of them. They still incorporate them as a part of a larger, more holistic, more complex view of reality. So when I'm at a higher rung, I'm looking from a higher altitude and I can see more of the terrain. Individuals and collectives make sudden jumps from paradigm bucket to paradigm bucket, and this is called a paradigm shift. The ways that we grow and evolve through paradigms is by expanding our capacity to see from new perspectives. How we do this is we have our lens, we take a step back, and we look at the lens that we have been using to look through. And when I'm able to see, oh, that's my lens, then my next lens is a more complex, more holistic, more inclusive lens that includes the prior lens in it. So by observing our interpretive lenses, we create more complex and we grow our interpretive lens itself. And what that means is that what we're doing here today, by studying this topic and by looking at all of these different paradigms that we're about to go into, we are creating a more complex lens for ourselves, and we are in fact growing our capacity to be in larger paradigms. One of the main thinkers on this topic is Ken Wilber. He's kind of the daddy of integral philosophy. He has a great line. He says, studying consciousness is psychoactive. And I love that because it points to this particular aspect. The more that I'm able to look at my lens, the more that my consciousness will naturally grow and evolve. One of the authors and thinkers who came up with this process, this dialectic, hang on, I'm going to answer a question. Is the state like an object? And paradigm is the process of observing. Yes, that is exactly it. The state is the object and the paradigm is the subject, so to speak, the subjective lens. And that brings us right into this quote by Robert Keegan. So the language here is a little bit dense, but he's going to say the same thing about subjects and objects. So the root, or the deep structure, of any principle of mental organization is the subject-object relationship. Object refers to those elements of our knowing or organizing that we can reflect on, handle, look at, be responsible for, relate to each other, take control of, internalize, assimilate, or otherwise operate upon. Those are the objects. Subject refers to those elements of our knowing or organizing that we are identified with, tied to, fused with, or embedded in. So we have object, we are subject. The relation of organizing principles or paradigms, so how they relate to each other, is transformative, qualitative, and incorporative. Each successive paradigm or principle subsumes or encompasses the prior principle or paradigm. That which was subject becomes object to the next principle. The new principle is a higher order principle, so it's more complex and more inclusive, that makes the prior principle into an element or tool of its system. That's a little bit on the process, and because we are fused with or identified with our subjective lens, it's hard to see, it's hard to talk about, it's hard to point to. So I'm saying this a number of different ways with some different authors to help so that we can kind of start to get what it is that we're looking at, or rather looking through, with paradigms. All of that said, now let's make this a little bit more concrete by going through the major paradigms that both individuals and humanity as a whole has progressed through. So over the course of the last 150 years, humans have been starting to recognize that there is a progression. There is a growth hierarchy that we move through. And across many, many different disciplines, so anthropology, sociology, developmental psychology, philosophy, art history, religion and spirituality studies, we're starting to see that there is a progression. And what integral theory has done, in particular Ken Wilber, is he's taken all of these models and he's put them on a map together. And when we look across the models, we can see that they're all kind of pointing to the same deeper structures that humans move to. We have reason to believe that there is one universal pattern that human consciousness, both as individuals and as groups, evolves through. And that this universal pattern holds across cultures, it holds across different epochs of history. The cultural interpretations and the specifics of what those are look different, of course, but how we view the world, there seems to be something universal or fundamental to it. So because we can look across all of these different models, across psychology, different schools of thought, we have a rainbow color scheme to talk about the different paradigms. So you can see that here on the left. We go from infrared to green, and we go even higher than green eventually. These are the paradigms. These are called the first tier paradigms, and we'll go through each one of these in turn. And once we talk about all of these 5 paradigms, I'll come back to the term first tier, and we'll look at what that means. First tier implies that there's a second tier, so we'll also talk about second tier. The language for these paradigms, archaic, magic, tribal, mythic, traditional, etc., is the standard language that integral theory uses, and most of these words originated with a philosopher named Jean Gebser. So starting with the archaic, what does that mean? The archaic paradigm is a unitive, symbiotic proto-self embedded in the anima mundi, in a living, animated world. So every single human being, when we are first newborns, when we're little babies, we exist in this paradigm, this worldview, in which there's really no clear distinction between self and other, self and not self. We're kind of merged in our environment. We're merged with our primary caregivers or the archetype of the Great Mother. Every single human has been through this, And in addition, if we go back, way, way back in human society, well, before society, when humans were living in caves, all humans and groups of humans also at one point existed in this archaic paradigm where there was no clear distinction between self and not self, and we were just kind of embedded in the natural world. So that's the archaic paradigm. I'm not going to go too much deeper into it, but we'll move right along to the next developmental level, the next more complex, more holistic paradigm, which is called magic tribal. So I made these little graphics. They help me because I'm a visual learner. So the archaic paradigm, there's a little dotted line between self and world. And now here at the magic paradigm, we can see there's a little bit more solid, but the self is still porous, and the self is embedded in the tribal social unit and within nature. The world that this self lives in is also the anima mundi, the animated world. And the way that I interact with my world is by means of magic. I live in a magical world. The world is animated, it has personality, I can talk to it, it can talk to me. And so that's why we call this the magic paradigm. When humans go back, the next developmental level is humans began to organize themselves into tribal units or small groups of about 100 to 200 people. They're very tightly knit. And in these groups, it's largely family and kinship bonds. Everybody kind of knows everybody else. So the self here is really deeply interconnected or embedded into the tribal unit. And it's challenging to individuate what are my needs and desires from the will of the tribe. To look at this a little bit more in depth, as I said, the self is still porous at this point. So how I experience the self is dreamlike with subject and object fluidity. One example of thinking or experience at this level, at this paradigm, is imagine that the word hit or the word curse has the power to injure somebody. There's a conflation or a blending of the meaning and the actual experience or the action itself. So there's subject-object fluidity, and it's kind of like what we experience when we go into dream time. Things just kind of morph and shift. Nature and the world around me is a living spirit world. So rocks have spirits. I can have a conversation with the moon. The forest can be angry with me or happy with me. And the personalities, the animated nature of the world around me is very visceral, very apparent. So values and motivations at this level. Core value is safety, physical safety, getting my physical needs met, food, water, shelter, things like that. And the motivations tend to be from out of fear or like primal raw emotions. There's kind of a reactivity to the intensity of my emotional state. And that's what motivates a lot of my behavior in this paradigm. So just as in the archaic state, we all start as newborns and we're merged. Then we develop, in the first few years of our life, we tend to be at this magical level where we live in an animated world. We can have conversations with all the different objects around us. Kind of ruled by these very strong, raw emotions. Truth and how we discern what is true and right at this paradigm is the will of the gods, and oftentimes that's communicated by the shamans or the chiefs of the tribe. And for us, when we're tiny humans, it's the will of the parents, which are like godlike figures. Whatever they say, that's what's true. That's what defines reality and morality. Spirituality at this level is animism. I live in an animated world. So now, moving to the next level, next layer of complexity, the mythic traditional paradigm. So you can see here, for the first time, we have a solid circle in the center with a self. There's a clearly defined self who has emerged. that self is a heroic self, kind of an adolescent self who's on a journey of becoming. In this paradigm, there is one divine or one transcendent truth. And that one divine or transcendent truth is somehow beyond this world. The world that I or we inhabit at this paradigm has been created or bestowed upon humans by this one transcendent truth, and it is our dominion. It's for us to rule over. So across different cultures, this one divine truth you could call Jesus or God or Yahweh or Jehovah. You could even call it Buddha. So for example, in Pure Land Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism, there's the idea that we do our spiritual work and someday we'll be reborn into the land of the medicine Buddhas, this transcendent realm that's free from suffering. And this world that we're in is samsara, the world of suffering. So it goes, you can make the parallels across different cultures. Let's dig in a little bit more to the specifics of this mythic traditional paradigm. So the self is a heroic self. And I see myself here as the chosen one, or we see ourselves as the chosen people. So there is one divine transcendent truth, and that one divine truth has revealed to us, there's been a revelation, what it is that we're here to do and how we exist in this world. And that revelation has made us chosen or special. Nature is, so the natural world is something to be conquered and ruled, or even nature is seen as something evil. So the devil's playground or samsara, the realm of suffering. The core values here are belonging, conforming, and tradition. So I want to say a little bit about this. In the development of groups of humans, we went from tribes in which everybody recognizes and knows everybody. We know our group, we know our unit. When humans started to develop into larger towns and societies, it got to the point where we couldn't recognize who's in my tribe and who's not in my tribe. And so there was a need, an organizing and need in our culture to understand how to make a coherent society. So we do this through tradition and mythology, the mythic traditional paradigm. When we all align to one mythology, one organizing story, then we all know who's in my group. And we can have a group that is much, much larger than the number of faces I can remember. So the core value now is belonging in the group. We're all in a group, and conforming to the morals and the values of that group. Also am valuing tradition because tradition is what carries forward the coherence of our group and the one divine truth, the access to that one divine truth. So my motivations are loyalty and to stay loyal and the loyalty of others. And my motivation is salvation. So oftentimes the transcendent truth gives us operating instructions for how to reach that transcendent realm, that realm beyond, or how to die. And when I die, I go into the afterlife to access that. So salvation, getting to that one transcendent truth, is a really strong motivation. So that truth comes from God or the divine more broadly, and then is communicated to most of the humans through religion and mythology. The gift of this structure, this paradigm of consciousness, is because it's so invested in aligning everybody to that myth, it created systems of writing, codes of laws, and it helped create morality, a moral sense that we hold each other to in society. This was really the paradigm that birthed society as we know it. Spirituality at this level is organized religion, and more specifically monotheistic or mono-truth religion. The next level, moving right along. is the mental modern paradigm. In this paradigm, the self who's in the center of the circle is the rational mind. So this is the ego, has really fully come on board and emerged, an egoic self. And the rational mind is able to comprehend, to understand, to know, to manipulate and build and create in this world. So the rational mind is reaching out. The world that the rational mind inhabits is a mechanical clock. So that's the metaphor. The technical term would be scientific materialism, and the worldview is that the entire physical universe is made of these tiny little fundamental particles, atoms or subatomic particles or quarks or strings or whatever that is. There's these units, and they're kind of like billiard balls where they're all flying around, and they operate according to a series of laws, the rules. So there's an operating system, and that operating system is discernible, understandable by the rational mind through mathematics, philosophy, and the scientific method. So we can understand the rules for how this giant mechanical clock is ticking, and we can manipulate that clock. This is the paradigm of mental modern. In individuals, this comes online in adolescence, and in particular if we continue through high school and into higher education, it really gets developed and then reinforced. As a collective, as society, Western civilization moved into this paradigm in the 1700s. It's called the Age of Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason. To comb through the specifics of this paradigm, this organizing lens a little bit more, the self is the rational mind, the ego. And the famous line from Descartes, cogito ergo sum, meaning I think, therefore I am, or thinking is the fundamental act of being. That is kind of the clarion call. That's the announcement of the rational mind, the egoic self. Here I am. Nature, the natural world, is governed by science, and it's seen as a bunch of resources of like raw material that's here for us to extract and then manipulate and combine and build. Rational mind loves to analyze and disassemble, and then to reassemble and create and build. The values here, first value is logic. This is how the rational mind operates. So any non-logical ways of thinking and knowing are eschewed. They're kind of pushed away or shunned. And logic is deeply valued. In addition, the ego, the rational mind, the conceptual mind, has this project of achieving, of becoming, of self-aggrandizing, of self-perfecting, both for good and for ill. So achievement is a core value here. My motivations in this paradigm, first off, there is competition between other rational minds, competition between other groups. So I'm motivated to be the best, to get there first, to do the most, to have the most, and to live the good life through that. In addition, there's a motivation of prestige. So the self-esteem that comes with having a self is I want to be recognized as someone who is good or wise or capable. The source of what is true is science and philosophy. So the prior two paradigms had completely different sources of truth, and historically with the rise of the Age of Enlightenment, all of the mythic ways of knowing, or more superstitious ways or intuitive ways of knowing, were stamped out rather forcefully for the truth that is ascertained through rational thought. So science and philosophy, that is the one and only source of truth. Spirituality that goes with this, there is not much in terms of spirituality at this level, but agnosticism or atheism. So we're here on this, in this material universe, and that is what is real. And the laws of science that govern this material universe, that is what is true. This is the mental modern paradigm. The set of problems that this solved, and then the set of problems that it raised were pretty huge. So I'll share a little bit about those, but first I want to share this quote from Alfred North Whitehead about how monumental it was for humans to move into this paradigm. The whole development of thought, of scientific materialism, occupied exactly 2 generations. It commenced with Galileo and it ended with Newton's Principia. And Newton was born in the year that Galileo died. Also, the lives of Descartes and Huygens fall within this period, the period occupied by these great terminal figures. The issue of the combined labors of these 4 men has some right to be considered as the greatest single intellectual success which mankind has achieved. It was huge. What happened when Western civilization moved into the Enlightenment age is that the reigning power structures of monarchy and serfdom and the political powers and influence of the church were dethroned. The monotheism was dethroned. And we have the American Revolution and the French Revolution and the rise of democracy, representative democracy, the recognition of the rights of man, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The rights of man expanded over the course of 150 years. We have the beginning of the feminism movement and suffrage, so women get included, finally. And the abolitionist movement, the anti-slavery movement. So there's a real large-scale movement to recognize and provide basic rights for all humans. Didn't do a perfect job, didn't do the best job, but largely there was a huge increase in personal liberty with the coming of this age. In addition, this age brought about modern medicine and all of the benefits of modern science. This age set the stage for the Industrial Revolution and capitalism. And so, for the issues that raised, what happened with the rise of the Industrial Revolution and capitalism is we created for the first time a middle class. And the amount of wealth and quality of life for humans across the board rose dramatically. Several fold. So it's a huge leap for humans. Now, the problems that this paradigm raised are those that come with capitalism and egocentrism. So the greed and the fear and the resource extraction and the large-scale degradation of ecosystems and biodiversity is basically a crisis now that has been created by the empire building, by the creative advance of this age. Okay, so the next paradigm, if you're all coming with me, is the plural postmodern paradigm. So this paradigm arose over the course of the 20th century, so in the last 100 years or so, and in particular the second half of the 20th century. Recall that each paradigm has a more holistic, more complex, more comprehensive lens that it's able to look through. So the mental modern lens, I'm looking through the lens of my egoic self. The next step is to take a step, the next level is to step back from just looking through my egoic lens and to see that there is a broader landscape. So what plural and postmodern paradigm is able to do is to recognize that I exist within a plurality of culturally defined worlds. And each one of these culturally defined worlds has its own truth, its own values, its own way of understanding reality. I also recognize that from the culture that I grew up in, I carry all sorts of cultural conditioning. And these cultural conditionings are, they get in the way of human rights. They get in the way of me knowing my true self. And so one of the main projects of the plural postmodern paradigm is deconstruction. I'm stripping away the false layers, the false conditioning on myself. So gender, race, class, ableism, things like that are being deconstructed and stripped away to get down into what's more true. Through all of this deconstruction, there is a question. The question is, who or what really is the self? So if I can see that the ego is this series of processes that kind of happen in my brain, together with all the cultural conditioning, and I take that apart, what is it underneath? Who am I underneath? And there's not a strong answer. It's more of a question that is posed in this paradigm. So the self is seen as socially constructed, and then through the project of this paradigm, deconstructed. One of the challenges that is raised by this paradigm is what lies underneath when I get through all of those layers. The Buddhist concept of no self, there is no self, just emptiness, has been adopted by Western culture in this paradigm. The sense that there is no essential me underneath all of this, that just the rules and the chemistry and the operating system, that's it. And there's nothing deeper underneath that. Nature is frequently at this paradigm viewed as a victim of humanity's greed. So all of the plundering that humanity has done through the prior two paradigms, through the colonialism and patriarchy of the mythic traditional paradigm, and then the capitalism and resource extraction, the industrialism of the mental modern paradigm, is now seen as basically humanity as a perpetrator and has caused this violence against nature. So Mother Earth is seen as something that has been harmed or wronged by humanity. The rise of the environmental movements, saving the earth, the deep ecology movement, these all rise through the postmodern paradigm. Values. So in the prior paradigm, it's rationality and the logical mind. Here we're expanding to include my emotions, my felt sensations, more intuitive ways of knowing. And what I'm valuing is the capacity to be sensitive to larger areas of knowledge. I'm becoming sensitive to myself. I'm welcoming the emotions of my internal process, and I'm becoming much more sensitive to the experience and truths of other groups of humans, how I may have impacted them, how they feel, what they think, what they do. In this larger, more sensitive worldview, I'm really coming home to nonviolence. So in the mythic traditional paradigm, salvation is the primary motivation. And however we get there, however many other infidels we have to kill to get there, how many of our own we need to sacrifice in order to get there, it's worth it for that one transcendent truth. So nonviolence is not a core value of that paradigm, but skipping ahead to plural postmodern, I recognize the inherent value and rights and of all humans and groups of humans, and with that it makes a call on me to act in ways that are not violent. The motivations here are justice, inclusion, sustainability. We're really working to create a more equitable world. Truth is a really interesting one, and this is one of the places where this paradigm gets a little bit caught up. So in recognizing that everybody and every group of humans has their own truth, we could say that there is no one truth, no capital T truth. And this is what relativism is. The issue with this perspective is while I recognize that different people have different truths, it can lead to there is no way to discern one truth from another, so every truth is valid regardless of how much it matches reality. It can devolve into nihilism or chaos or just utter meaninglessness. If meaning is everywhere and arbitrary, then there is no actual meaning anywhere. Spirituality at this paradigm of consciousness is humanitarianism. I'm really focused on the well-being of humans, and New Age spirituality, which welcomes back into the fold some of the more marginalized forms of spirituality that got pushed away or suppressed by the prior two paradigms. So indigenous spirituality, paganism, neo-shamanic practices, these things that were considered like evil or wrong by the other paradigms are now welcomed back in, and we're starting to find and incorporate the value from those. In addition, science took a big step forward beyond scientific materialism, and it includes scientific materialism, it includes that way of knowing and understanding, but it does so from a larger, more holistic view. So systems theorist Fritjof Capra describes it like this: the belief that in every complex system, the behavior of the whole can be understood in its entirety by the property of its parts is central to the Cartesian paradigm. This was Descartes' celebrated method of analytic thinking, which has been an essential characteristic of modern scientific thought. The great shock of the 20th century science has been that systems cannot be understood by analysis. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. In a system that's working together, there is an organizing pattern, and that organizing pattern is emergent and it's dispersed. It's not held by any one of the specific parts. So there is a greater level of complexity that we now recognize, and we need a different type of thinking and a different type of mathematics to understand how systems work. Einstein's relativity states that there is no one universal here and now. It's all relative to the observer. So again, the relativistic qualities. Heisenberg uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics says that by observing with greater and greater specificity, the observer impacts the thing being observed. And so we have this fuzziness, the rise of chaos theory, that when we get sufficiently complex systems, they are chaotic and emergent, and we can't trace back the causes to one place. This is what caused this behavior. This is what postmodernism from the scientific lens looks like. There is another pitfall of the, I'm going to check this question. The lens of the observer changes the quality and content of what is being observed. Yes, exactly. The lens of the observer changes the quality and content of what is being observed. That's it. Yes. So another pitfall of the plural postmodern paradigm, another one of the challenges that it raises through the solutions that it attempts to provide. In the worst case, postmodern individualists claim with absolute certainty that there is no position from which to judge anything. They do not recognize the inherent self-contradiction in this stance, which values or privileges this idea over all others, which of course is a form of judgment and hierarchical ordering of value. So if I say there is no capital T one truth, that statement itself is a claim of absolute universal truth. And there is the contradiction. Okay, so these are our first tier paradigms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the bottom. And before we move on to our second tier paradigms, let's talk about what first tier means, why there's this differentiation in these categories. Within the first tier paradigms, I'm looking through my lens, I am only able to recognize the validity and coherence and worth of my paradigm. I can see that other people have other paradigms, that not everybody is within my paradigm, my way of seeing the world, but everybody else is either crazy or wrong. Crazy, stupid, or wrong. I cannot recognize the validity of their worldview. I can only see that my worldview is the one that makes sense. So there are three big camps in Western culture today. The plural postmodernism, the mental modernist, and the mythic traditional. These are like three factions within our society. And a lot of what we see, what's called the culture wars, can be understood as the power dynamics and the tension that exists between these three paradigms. So just to give one example, let's say I'm in the mental modern paradigm, the rational mind and the scientific method, that is what is true and what is right and what is real. So I can look up the ladder at plural postmodern, and I can see these neoliberal academics who are destroying society. And I can see these tree-hugging hippies who don't understand that business is what puts food on the table and makes the world work. They're crazy or they're wrong. I can look down the ladder and I can see the religious folks who believe that the world was created in 7 days and they don't understand science. And I think that they are crazy or wrong or childish or whatever pejorative judgments I make. There's no space for recognizing the validity of their worldview. So you can go through this from any of the three perspectives, how they view the other two as wrong or crazy. So that is indicative of the first tier lens. I can only see the validity of my lens. When we get to second tier, which is what we are doing right now in this talk, we can start to see that every lens is a necessary rung on this developmental ladder. And we can recognize that each one of these lenses has an appropriate developmental place. Each one is internally coherent, it makes sense within that lens, and valuable because it is whole within itself and a part of this larger whole, this larger growth hierarchy. That is a second tier perspective. I can recognize that I have a lens and I can see that everybody else has a lens. Everybody has a right to be exactly where they are, and that everybody is on this evolutionary journey, which means taking steps through these successive lenses. So every lens has its place. That is what makes second tier. And today, humanity as a group, it's thought, it's believed that we're kind of on the cusp of kind of getting this, that enough of the culture is reaching a tipping point. And when we get to second tier, it really is another huge leap in how we're able to understand ourselves and others. So now let's dig into these two second tier paradigms, integral and then high integral. So if you recall, I'm going to go back to the plural, the doodle I have for plural postmodern. There are many culturally defined worlds, but who and what is the self? Deconstructing, deconstructing, deconstructing. So now at integral, we have found self, and it is a holistic self system, interconnected with other people, with the planet, with nature, with the entire universe. I have found and experienced wholeness within myself. And from that core of me, I'm able to now relate back out across my whole reality. The world that I live in is a life world. It is Gaia, a living, breathing organism. It is the anima cosmos. Prior, I was using the word anima mundi, meaning animated world. And from the integral paradigm, we have the anima cosmos, the cosmic reality, this fabric of the universe that we exist in, and it is animated. I'll say more about that soon. So we're looking at wholes and interconnection, and so we have kind of this honeycomb lattice here. We're seeing how it all fits together and how it harmonizes as a system, or as systems of systems start to harmonize. In a little bit more detail, who I am is a holistic self-system. I am whole in myself. I'm a system, and I'm interconnected with all of these other wholes as a part. Nature is viewed as a grand web of life. I'm seeing all of these interconnections. The idea of Gaia is when I look at the biosphere of the earth and I see that it is self-regulating, that it is in some ways autonomous, that there is an intelligence to it, and that, you know, our atmosphere breathes and self-regulates, then that leads us to see the entire earth as a whole, complete organism, the Gaia hypothesis. Values here. So my core value is self-actualization. I'm stepping into me, and I'm expanding who or what I can be and the realms that I'm able to access. I do all of this through wholeness. I'm experiencing wholeness, every layer and level of reality. The motivation is evolution. So I'm now recognizing that there is an evolutionary ladder that we are developing through. I get really excited about it. Let's do the personal growth work. Let's evolve our consciousness together. Like, yeah, let's do this. And it's not one rational mind doing it solo, aggrandizing itself. The motivation is interconnection. Let's learn how to do this together. Sources of truth. So having gone inside and found the core of self, I'm now experiencing truth within me. And having had experiences of truth, not coming from the outside, but from the inside, I take that truth and I look out, and I'm now able to find it and confirm it everywhere. So truth is experiential, and it's an integration of science and spirituality. The prior paradigms, the fight between science and religion, is just these two lenses who can't recognize the validity of each other. In the integral paradigm, I'm able to see the deeper truth that both science and spirituality are drawing from different perspectives. And in recognizing that deeper truth, I start to integrate these two seemingly opposed realms of knowledge. Spirituality at this level is pan-experientialism, and I'm going to take a slide to talk about what that is in more detail in a moment. But first, just to give you some other philosophers' language describing the integral paradigm, so you get it from them as well as from me. Here is Ervin Laszlo, a scientist. Once again, we are not strangers in an alien, mechanistic universe. The grand synthesis of evolution reintegrates us with nature. Our distant ancestors considered themselves an organic part of all that exists, expressing their belief through myth and confirming it through magic. Our not-so-distant forebears thought they knew better and put man above nature, and indeed beyond it. Now, at Integral, we are back in the embrace, indeed in the womb, of a creative universe capable of bringing forth life and even consciousness. Ken Wilber, who is really the spearhead at present day of the integral movement, describes it like this. The integral view sees itself as intrinsically interwoven with the entire universe, interconnected, seamless, vital, living, creative, and conscious cosmos. Integral levels themselves are creative and highly conscious. Each moment is new, fresh, spontaneous, and alive. It is the first stage that integrates, or better, recognizes, the already existing prior union of knowing and feeling, consciousness and being, epistemology, and ontology. There's a weaving together and integrating into whole. Now let's talk about spirituality and what happens with spirituality at this level, or more particularly the evolution of spirituality across these paradigms. Epistemology and ontology. Epistemology is how I understand knowledge, so how I know things. Ontology is my experience of the phenomenal reality. So he's basically saying mind and matter right there. Great question. Resurgence of spirituality. Okay, so how does spirituality weave through these different paradigms? Well, in the archaic and then more pronounced in the magic paradigms, we exist within a sacred world, the anima mundi. The world is animated, has personality, and everything has its own sacredness. So I'm embedded in a sacred world. It's all yellow in this diagram. When I move to the mythic level, there is one transcendent truth. So there is a sacred, there is a Godhead or divine, but it's transcendent, it's beyond. It's not in this world, it's not in this realm. This realm, this world is a profane world where it's lacking the sacred. And because the sacred is translated through religion, mystical experiences of the divine are cloistered away to the priestly class, and the vast majority of participants in this paradigm only get to recognize the mystical experience through other. They hear about it, but they follow the myths and the traditions. In the mental paradigm, mental modern, we're in a material world. And this material world is what is real. There is no beyond. And so there's no space for spirituality, and there's not a recognition of the sacredness that's here. It's just material. The plural paradigm, I'm in many socially conditioned worlds, and I'm valuing the emotional experience of different humans and groups of humans. So I can recognize that there are many, and value that there are many different spiritual traditions, and I want to celebrate those, but the spiritual and religious components are wrapped into the cultural and humanitarian aspects, which is primarily valued. I want to keep this rich cultural heritage because it's part of the fullness of this group of humans' expression, and that's what I'm valuing. The mystical experience itself is less primary. In addition, the spiritual experiences of any type of organized religion that may have a power structure or a type of hierarchy is being deconstructed, pulled apart, and attacked at this level. So then we get to integral. And having found the wholeness of self inside and recognizing the wholeness of the world outside, there is a massive, all-pervasive, like rainbow explosion return to the sacred. Self is sacred, the cosmos is sacred, nature is sacred, religion is sacred. I'm finding truths, spiritual truths in religious tradition. I'm connecting to the sacred or the mystical core of those religions. So everything, all of a sudden, we have a massive resurgence of spirituality at integral. So what is that spirituality? We'll come back now to pan-experientialism. So the kind of defining, it's not the only one, it's not like it has to be this way, but the prevalent spiritual view at integral is called pan-experientialism, and here's what it is. The central tenet of pan-experientialism is that experience goes all the way down. Pan means all of, the whole or universal. Therefore, pan-experience means experience as an ingredient all through the universe, permeating all levels of being. Not just human brains, but individual cells, individual molecules, individual atoms, even individual subatomic particles, incorporate a capacity for feeling, a degree of subjective interiority. According to panexperientialism, all individuals and all entities possess this capacity. To put it in my language, we recognize consciousness in humans. And when we kind of look to less complex entities, animals have awareness, they are responsive and reactive, and to a certain extent they have a little bit of personality. We go down the ladder, down the ladder, down the ladder. There's no place where I can draw the line and say, okay, consciousness is over here and not consciousness is over here. And because there's no place that I can draw the line, the panexperientialist proposition is that there is no line and that there is a subjective interior, a felt sense, a degree of consciousness, however faint or rudimentary, that goes all the way down. And it is a core feature, this interiority or this consciousness is a core feature of the universe at all layers and all levels. We live in a conscious cosmos. Consciousness, by the way, we can look down the ladder, but we can also look up the ladder. So the idea that Gaia, that the globe is conscious, the idea that the solar system has a consciousness, the solar logos, or the galaxy, or even indeed the cosmos itself, cosmic consciousness, that there is an interiority of presence and awareness that pervades every layer and every level. That is the spiritual view that many of people who land at the integral level step into. So it's estimated that about 10% of Western adults have developed to the high integral level, high integral paradigm. Less than 1% of human individuals, human adults in Western culture have reached the high integral paradigm. So this paradigm is still very much emergent, it's new. We are, by contemplating it, we are contributing to the morphic field of what this thing is. It's still being fleshed out now. So more tentatively, here is my perspective on the high integral paradigm. All of the prior little doodles that I made had some kind of a self within some kind of a world. At the high integral paradigm, the boundary between self and other is becoming more and more transparent. And instead, I'm recognizing that everything is a process. We are in a process of self-becoming, all layers and levels. And that unfolding, that movement, has its own perfection. So if I were to try to draw a circle and say, this is the self, that's not the truth of my experience anymore. Sometimes my self looks like this, but other times it looks differently. And so I'm aligning to the greater patterns and the greater movements of life and universe. So here I have an unwinding spiral, or a winding spiral, it goes both directions. Eleutheropoiesis is a word which I have coined and which I'm introducing here. Eleutheroi is the Greek word for freedom, and poiesis is the Greek word for creation. It means creation of freedom. So this evolutionary process that humans are on, the nature of that process is that we are creating greater and greater degrees of freedom. Pulling from other spiritual traditions, Dzogchen in Zen Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism is the great perfection. And we recognize that the suchness of this world right here, right now, has its own perfection. In Kabbalah, so Jewish mysticism, there's a parallel concept of the great work. So to dig into the high integral paradigm a little bit more, I experience self as a cosmocentric process. No longer egocentric or personality-centric, no longer tribe-centric or group-centric, but now I'm including the entire cosmos, that recognition that there is an interior level of consciousness that pervades everything and that I participate in, and that in fact I am. Nature, again, is seen as a web of life. So at integral, I'm recognizing all these things that link together. I'm seeing the patterns. More and more as I progress into high integral, instead of just seeing it out there, I'm experiencing it viscerally. I'm experiencing the web of life, or Indra's net, moving through me, reflected all around me. The core value. So at the integral paradigm, I get wholeness, I get super excited about wholeness, and then I'm self-actualizing, I'm engaging, I'm wanting to work on evolution. At the high integral paradigm, I'm able to take even another step back and see my agenda in getting myself and others to evolve. And I'm recognizing that the evolution is a fundamental feature of this reality that I live in. And I'm able to relax a little bit and to trust the process to unfold itself. And in that trusting of the unfolding of the process, I step into compassion. Compassion for me, exactly where I am on my path, and compassion for all beings everywhere, exactly where they are on their path. I'm able to recognize me in all. The motivation at this level is construct and ego transparency. So what does that mean? When I get to this level, when I look at a tree, I now begin to recognize that the language that I use when I say tree creates a filter and a definition which blocks the actual experience, which is undefined and unknowable, but experiential. And so language and all of these filters that I create for my reality, I start to see them. The constructs of how solid, seemingly solid, physical, stable reality is created through my brain. And then that starts to become more and more transparent, and I let go of my hold on needing things to be solid. And instead, I might have an experience of this thing and then marvel at how we call it a tree. In addition, that same type of transparency I'm applying to my ego. I'm seeing all the layers and self-protective mechanisms of the ego, and I'm disidentifying with that being self. I'm starting to see through that self-referential, self-reflexive piece of consciousness into the larger, more vast sea of self and consciousness that I'm now starting to experience myself as. So my motivation, I'm doing a lot of work to see through, to move through those types of obscurations. Truth is whatever is arising in present experience. And there's a real simplicity that comes with that. Spirituality here is eleutheropoiesis. It is recognizing that humans are, and this cosmos is, fundamentally creative and free, and that the liberating action of human consciousness is always at work, and I'm just aligning to that process. Bill Plotkin describes this level, not using this language or not referencing this system at all, but when I read this, I was like, oh, this is it. So here's somebody else's language. The gift that the master is to her people goes beyond her leadership, mentoring, and tending to the community soul. Her very being is a gift of wholeness. The core value in her life, which arises from her psycho-spiritual center of gravity, is the desire that everything and every creature be allowed its true place, so that the world functions in its fullness, in accordance with its comprehensive destiny. She appreciates that each species, each habitat, and each social issue is related to all others. She understands that everything is alive, that it all fits together, and that we are all participants and reflections of the whole. One final quote to kind of cap it off from Sri Aurobindo, who's perhaps the grandfather of integral philosophy, this integral spirituality. He says, "This one being and consciousness is involved here in matter. Evolution is the process by which it liberates itself. Consciousness appears in what seems to be inconscient, and once having appeared is self-impelled to grow higher, and at the same time to enlarge and develop towards a greater and greater perfection. Life is the first step of this release of consciousness. Mind is the second. But the evolution does not finish with mind. It awaits a release into something greater, a consciousness which is spiritual and supramental." Okay. Final little bit here to kind of pull it all together. So last week I talked about states of consciousness. Now we've just covered the paradigms of consciousness, and we can put them all together. So this chart is my adaptation of what's called a Wilbur-Combs graph. On the bottom, the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we have states of consciousness, which represent increasing awareness. These are the contents of what we experience. They go from gross, subtle, causal, witness, all the way up to non-dual. What we have now discussed and looked at, just like the very highest level, this goes deeper and deeper and deeper the more time I spend with it. But what we touched on today are the paradigms, so the vertical axis, which are increasing development. And we looked through our first tier and our second tier paradigms. So there they are. So everybody, all humans, and all groups of humans are somewhere on this graph. Interestingly, any developmental level, every developmental level has access to every state of consciousness. So from the mythic level, I can be a realized spiritual master and exist in non-dual suchness. Similarly, from the high integral level, I can access all the way up to non-dual unity. Very interesting and important point, though, is that because by growing through the paradigms, we're moving up the ladder and we're transcending and including, creating more complex, more holistic views. What I see from high integral is more comprehensive and deeper than what I'm able to see from the mythic paradigm, even in the same state. So the states are interpreted through the lens, and they look differently through different lenses. This map also explains why we can have religious or spiritual leaders who are fully awake, but still promulgating like power over structures and deep shadow for the groups of people that they lead. Because there's a different developmental ladder beyond just waking up, and Wilbur calls it growing up, that we have to develop through. I want to just mention here, we're not going to go deep into it, that there are even higher levels of development. There is a third tier, and what makes third tier is that at that next level, we incorporate the state of consciousness as a stable baseline with a more advanced view. And so the states and the paradigms begin to unite together in greater and greater degrees, working all the way up to the highest level structure of consciousness with non-duality conjoined together. That is beyond the scope of this talk. I think I've given more than enough information already, but just to name that more has been mapped out. But the paradigms that I've listed here are the ones that either have fully fleshed out into our culture and society or are in the process of being seeded. And above that, there's really no collective component to the paradigms. So let's take a breath. The larger intention that I have here is sharing about consciousness. And that by looking at what these are, digging into them, and by you digesting it and formulating your own opinions, whether you agree with me or not, whether you like, doing that work stimulates the development of our growth. And this is how we align to our path of self-becoming, and also how we contribute to a more holistic, more mature society that we now participate in. And next week, I'm going to be doing this again on a new topic. We'll be talking about archetypes and the nature of self with a big S self. And this is drawing on Jungian psychology and how that relates to everything that we've talked about so far. Okay, beautiful everyone. Blessings on your day. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.